Something to consider when moving in with a roommate is who is going to be the renter or the occupant that is listed on the rental agreement. In some cases, only one of you will be listed, and in others, the rental agreement may specify both names if you have a roommate. So what should you do? Well, in today's video, we're going to cover everything you know about what a rental agreement is, what are your rights, what you should do with a roommate, and how that will affect your type of occupancy, and more. So if you're ready, let's jump into the first point of what is a residential rental agreement. The rental agreement, which is often referred to as a lease, is a document that outlines the length of the tenancy, how much rent will be, and the responsibilities of both the renter and the landlord during the period where they're entered into the agreement. In some provinces and states, the rental agreement is required to be signed by both the renter and the landlord, with a paper copy given to the renter. In other states or provinces, an oral agreement is fine. So if you're unsure how to interact with your landlord about the rental agreement, you can always check the laws and regulations in your local area. A lease is actually just one type of rental agreement, and that usually binds both parties for a period of 6 months to a year. During this period, no changes to the rental agreement can be made unless both parties are on board with the changes. For instance, you as a renter will be specified to pay a certain amount each month, and you must continue to do so until the agreement is over or until both you and the landlord have arranged something different. Well, there are 3 types of renters that you should be aware of as a potential tenant and renter yourself. And this will change based on your relationship with your roommate and how the landlord has set up your rental agreement. So let's dive into the 3 here. Co-renters is the most common type of agreement. And this is where 2 or more renters share a single lease agreement. Both renters are responsible for paying the rent, as well as any repairs or damages to the unit that the renter or their guests may have had. For instance, it's up to the renters themselves to determine who is responsible for what portion of the rent, as well as the repairs or damages if there is any. This is usually settled with a roommate agreement. For instance, if you had a roommate that moved out as a co-renter, you yourself would still be responsible for paying the entire amount of rent. And if that roommate left when there was damages to the property, you may be responsible for repairing those damages, as your name is still under the lease agreement. In an instance like this, you may decide to pursue legal proceedings against the renter that decided to skip town. However, your city or state may not help you in this process. And any disputes between co-renters usually have to be worked out between themselves. There's no regulations or laws, usually in the city or state or province level, that will give you assistance to take legal action against a co-renter. You usually have to do that yourself in a small claims court proceeding. So when you sign a lease with another roommate, you'll also want to check if there's a joint and several liability clause. For instance, if you move out without notifying the landlord, your name is still on the lease agreement. And if down the road, the other roommate decides to move out or skip town without finishing that lease agreement and paying the rent, the landlord could still come after you, as your name is still on the lease agreement, and proceed action to get that money for the missed rent payments. You see, you could find yourself in an uncomfortable situation if you didn't know there was a joint and several liability clause. So just be sure to double check this as a renter. The second type is renters in common. In this situation, each roommate has their own separate agreement with the landlord. When it comes to paying rent, each roommate will have a specified amount that they'll need to pay to the landlord. And if they don't pay, the other roommates won't be negatively affected or will be required to pay that missed rent. Renters in common can also be listed on the same agreement, as long as each individual rent payment is specified and laid out for each renter. If there is a dispute between the renters in common, you may notify your landlord and they'll have to handle the situation. And if the landlord doesn't respond, you'll need to engage the regulatory bodies that will protect you and your tenant rights in your local state or province. The one downside to renters in common agreements is that if you have a roommate you like and they decide to move out, the landlord can fill that space and they don't have any obligation to discuss with you who that person will be. So you may end up with a new roommate that you don't really like. The third type is an occupant. An occupant is someone who is not named on the rental agreement, but has taken up accommodation in a household with someone who is named on the rental agreement. Occupants also have the same rights and responsibilities as a renter. For instance, if the roommate that is named on the rental agreement decides to change the locks and move out all your stuff, there is action you can take as you still have the rights of a renter. If you'd like to protect yourself further, you should possibly discuss with the landlord about having your own rental agreement for the location you're renting. However, in the instance where you yourself, the renter, is the one labeled on the rental agreement, and you do have an occupant-style renter living with you, you may want to set up a roommate agreement to specify the amount of rent to be paid and the responsibilities of each party. However, in the instance where you yourself, the renter, is the one labeled on the rental agreement, and you do have an occupant-style renter living with you, you may want to set up a roommate agreement to specify the amount of rent to be paid and the responsibilities of each party. This way, there'll be no confusion at the end of the month as in who owes what for the rent and who is responsible for the type of tasks in the household. It's very important to know your rights as a renter. But when it comes to lawsuits between landlords and renters, or other renters in common or other occupants, things can get very complicated. So I want to explain some of your general rights here so you have an understanding of what your rights are as a renter. For instance, if you're a renter in California or British Columbia and you've signed a rental agreement, all your rights will be outlined in the Civil Code or the Residential Tenancy Act. If, for some reason, there are other conditions on your lease, such as specifying a shorter notice period, and you did not sign a rental agreement, then these conditions won't apply to you. Instead, you should follow the Civil Code or the Residential Tenancy Act, as these are the laws that outline your rights, and these are the rights that you have. So what happens when the roommate you're living with actually owns the house and is technically your landlord? Well, in cases like this, you would be considered a lodger, but you'd still have the same rights as a renter would. And this may differ by province or state. So I recommend that you check with your local tenant or renter organizations to see what exactly your rights would be in a scenario where you are considered a lodger. Lastly, if you're looking for more links on the exact places you can go for your province or state to find out your rights as a renter, you can check out the link in the description below where we have a full-fledged article on all about your rights, the rental agreements, and other things we've covered in this video. So as a renter, you should now have a solid understanding of what a rental agreement is and the different types of renters out there and what category you may fall under. Lastly, you should have a solid understanding of your renter rights. So now, it's time to get renter's insurance. If you're looking for a place to get a quick online quote for your renter's insurance, you can visit squareoneinsurance.com.